A gwine úsla, fáilte chuig an áit néfa seo, relic Ballard. Ina táimid de Comóra trúr fear macánta. Pádraig ó Hingasa, Tomás ó Líra, Seán ó Luchlan. Trúr fear atá cora san uig speisialta seo. Reverend Father, family members of the deceased and friends, welcome to this special commemoration, the delayed centenary of Canada Cross. This ceremony at Ballard is one of remembering the three men who lost their lives at Canada Cross and are buried here: Patrick Hennessy, Thomas O'Leary, and John O'Loughlin. They made the ultimate sacrifice at a very untimely age, and today we remember them. We want to remember their families and the impact on their lives. We acknowledge the extraordinary generosity of the families in accommodating their burial in this plot, a place where we can stand and commemorate. Today, too, we think of the people injured at Canada Cross: Pat Maguire, James Fitzgerald, Michael J. O'Brien, Martin Maloney, Joe Canalty, Tom Conway, Thomas Reedy, James Hurley, and Noni Donlan. We also remember all those people traumatized by the events of Canada Cross. The psychological impact on the people present on that fateful night and on those at home can never be quantified. Today we think of those people. In that spirit of remembrance, I now invite Father Donagh to lead us in prayer. We now move to the wreath-laying ceremony. The wreath will be laid by Peter Hennessy, great-grandson of Patrick Hennessy, and Joe Flynn, cousin of John O'Loughlin. Kenneth Olson, great-great-grandson of Thomas O'Leary, who lives in the United States, had hoped to be here with us today to assist with the wreath laying, but unfortunately that was not possible. Before we leave, may I thank everybody who made this ceremony possible: Father Donagh, Sean Neelan for playing the pipes, Peter and Joe for laying the wreath, James Sexton for sound, the wooden shelter and platform supplied by Paddy Joe Egan, the graveyard committee and people who made the graveyard so nice for today's events. I'd like to thank everybody here present. The schedule for the remainder of the day is as follows. There is an exhibition at the hall. This exhibition reflects the period of these events and is curated by Pat Kirby. Following the exhibition, Mass will be celebrated in the parish church, Milltown. This will be followed by a candlelit procession to Canada Cross for the commemorative ceremony. John Tracy will give a lecture in the hall this evening marking the events of Canada Cross. Dr. Tracy's lecture will be available on YouTube as a separate video.
And today we remember, and this weekend we remember. This is a time of remembering. We remember Patrick and John and Thomas. Their lives were cut short so unjustly. The Bishop of Killaloe at the time of their murder said it was the slaughter of helpless and inoffensive people. It's important to remember them. It's profoundly, indeed, important to remember. It's also important to remember the courage and the bravery of their families after them, who were presented with very difficult times after their deaths.
The plaque is positioned close to the bullet holes that remain since that night. The type of plaque is the internationally recognized blue plaque, originally crafted in the 1860s to mark significant people and events. By an amazing coincidence, the plaque was crafted the same time that Canada Cross got its name. That was in 1800. It is entirely fitting, therefore, that the first blue plaque, which is being commissioned by the Mid-Clare Brigade, is therefore going to be unveiled at Canada Cross this evening. We will now move to the unveiling of the plaque. It is a singular honour to call on Stephen Hennessy, the great-grandson of Patrick Hennessy, and Joe Flynn, cousin of John O'Loughlin, to unveil the plaque.
Ireland, the land of the harp and the shamrock, Ireland, the land of the true and the good, Ireland, the land of the true-hearted patriots who shed for their country their last drop of blood. Each Irishman, he has cause to remember those who defied the Saxons' bold boast when they tried to enslave her, in misery degrade her. May their names never die, that's an Irishman's toast. Here's to the lake, the vale and the green moss, the harp and the shamrock, the green flag and cross. Here's to the heroes that Ireland can boast of. May their names never die, that's an Irishman's toast. Our brave Dan O'Connell was a true Irish hero. For Ireland he fought hard for justice and right. No threats could alarm him, no bribe could deceive him. May his soul shine above where is all good and bright. Green be the memories of a Manchester martyr, since noble young Alan Perlarkin and O'Brien. Though the scaffold was their doom, 'twas for Ireland's freedom. Forever may their names in our history shine. Here's to the lake, the vale and the green moss, the harp and the shamrock, the green flag and cross. Here's to the heroes that Ireland can boast of. May their names never die, that's an Irishman's toast. Then long may it grow, our dear little shamrock, green o'er the graves where our darling once lie. Grow there to show them, our friends and our foremen, how Irishmen live and how Irishmen die. Let Erin remember she has men to defend her. Their hearts are as brave as the true ones of yore. Those names we will cherish till memory perish. So let the toast go around for Ireland evermore. Here's to the lake, the vale and the green moss, the harp and the shamrock, the green flag and cross. Here's to the heroes that Ireland can boast of. May their names never die, that's an Irishman's toast. May their names never die, that's an Irishman's toast.
Go on, lads. Big rousing cheer for the three girls. Well done.
Thanks very much, girls. The next speaker needs absolutely no introduction. Michael Hennessy is now going to address you. Michael is here on my right, grandson of the late Patrick Hennessy.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much. And can I just start off by thanking Mary and the Mid-Clare Brigade Memory 100 Centenaries Society for their great work in organising this. Mary invited me a few years ago, and Peter, our son in particular, to become part of it because of the family connection, and it is an absolute privilege to be here. Can I just put, Mary mentioned there about the origins of the blue flag and what it represents, and the kind of significance in relation to this ceremony here. Back around just 1860s, there was a group of Fenians taking action in America, and they got together and decided to do a little sortie across the border into Canada. They laid siege or attacked a police station held by the British over there, and I'm not sure of the actual success or otherwise, but they were able to promptly return to the States where they were safe. There is another significance as well, because when the deeds of these good people became known around the country, several other places adopted the name Canada. But as far as I know, it's only here that Canada Cross held onto it and remained at. But there is a further significance as well, is that later on in that century, when the Fenian group continued with their attempts to go towards the country's freedom, a group of the Fenians met on a regular basis somewhere here, and they became known as the Canada Boys. So there you are, that's the significance of Canada Cross. I was asked, the reason I said that is that I've often been asked as to how the name came, and I heard lots of different stories, but that apparently, according to our historians in the town, Cyril Jones and Dr. John, that is the origins of Canada Cross. I'll try now to give you a feeling for the awful sadness of the tragedy that happened here. As Mary said, 103 years ago, one day, and roughly around this time, earlier in the day, word had begun to filter through around the country of a significant judgment due to the great efforts internationally in the House of Commons and places like that, and the people, the Republican fighters who were currently in Mount Jail and on hunger strike were released. And when the information began to filter around the country, many places around began to celebrate in their different ways. It seems to be a tradition with Milltown that we celebrate lots of events like that of some significance with bonfires. And it was decided under guidance from the local Republican movement and I think members of the transport workers to have a bonfire just roughly where the gentleman is standing in the yellow jacket. The bonfire, in order to keep it contained, was started in a tar barrel, and the town, there was no real lighting in the town, but along the street in most of the houses people lit candles, so you had a certain amount of lightness or whatever as the evening went on. The celebrations were as they were a combination of chat, conversations, storytelling, celebrations of music, which is our great tradition here down through the years, and dancing. All these things were going on, and as the historians that have done, most notably Dr. John Tracy, who did his master's degree on this and has tremendous information on it, the three girls gave a wonderful rendition of what was the final song sung around the tar barrel. In the course of the evening, while the celebrations were going on, there was two occupying forces here in the town at the time. Members of a Scottish regiment, the Royal Scottish Regiment, who were billeted in what was known as where the community centre now is, and a company of RIC guards or soldiers who were billeted at the end of the town there in what is now Burke's Garage. The RIC were in the command of a man called Sergeant James Hampson. Sergeant James Hampson had made his way to Milltown some months before that. He had been posted, he was from Derry originally and had been in several other posts, but because of drunkenness and unpredictability, he had been demoted and he found himself here in charge of the RIC. As the evening wore on, evidence that has happened afterwards came and proved that he was in an inebriated state that day. But anyway, as the celebrations were going on, it was noticed that he had, by the way, earlier on, the troop of Scottish soldiers from up here had passed by, and there was no rancour, no sign of aggression or anything like that, and they made their way to the end of the town, where they joined in with a company of RIC officers led by Sergeant Hampson, and they walked up through the town, and as they arrived, certain men began a little bit concerned about what was likely to happen. But at that stage, this was maybe 9:30 or 9:45, the bonfire was dying down and the ceremonies were beginning to come towards an end. They approached at the far side there from the market house up, and with fixed bayonets, they were obviously there to break up the melee or to make up the celebrations. They took up their positions, some lying on the ground, pointing the guns in the direction of the crowd. Some kneeled, and some stood at the back. And the sergeant approached the tar barrel where the people were still singing, and it looked like he was just going to try and stop to carry on. And as he approached them, he moved his hand to the position where his revolver was, and he apparently, according to the history of it, he walked up to the people at the barrel. He shouted, "Disperse," and immediately pulled the pistol and started to fire. The orders that company were given were twofold. They had been told that they were not to fire unless fired on, or unless they got a command from the man in charge, Sergeant James Hampson. However, whatever reason, whatever panic was in it, they immediately launched fire. And they continued to fire for something in the region of 3 minutes. And the evidence of their bullet was all along the street to your left there, along the houses, with shattered windows and mortar and concrete knocked all over the place. Some of the shots arrived here, and as Mary said, there was a hole in that wall right up to recently. As youngsters growing up, it would be pointed out to us regularly. It's now covered by the plaque. So gradually, the timeline will be quick, because most of this will be detailed by Dr. John at the presentation. But as the evening went on and the panic ensued, as a result of that, people ran in many different... I think James, sorry about that. Sorry about that. That's used to the microphone. Anyway, the crowd obviously panicked and ran in different directions, tried to get away from the shooting that went on. And later on, as things kind of settled down, the company of soldiers promptly stood up and vanished back in the direction of the barracks, I think afraid that there might be retaliation, because the realization of the awful thing that had just happened was beginning to dawn on people. But then, as the good people of Milltown who were there began to look and see what had actually happened, and it wasn't immediately apparent that there was 3 fatalities, and something like maybe 10 or 11 other people were damaged or wounded, some by shot. So the first evidence of the fatal wounding was near the tar barrel where John O'Loughlin fell. John, or Jack as he was known, he lived just up the Ennistimon Road here, and in the 1911 census his mother was dead, his father was still alive. He had one sister, Mary, who was the eldest of the family, and 4 brothers, 3 brothers and himself. And just to give you an idea of the awful horrors of war, 2 of those brothers had fought in the Second World War with the Munster Fusiliers. One of them was fatally killed during the war, and the other man was so seriously wounded that he spent maybe up to 3 years in hospital. And the absolute poignancy of their death was that the younger brother, Martin, saw people carrying a body in the direction of one of the houses here. And when he went to help them, it was dark at that stage. It was only when they arrived at the house that he realized that his brother was dead. He gave this in testimony. I remember the older sister, Mary. I remember her, she died around the 50s. Thomas O'Leary fell, mortally wounded, just around here. And he was carried. He was actually dead when the people came to try and help him, and they brought him to his home, just up the road there. And just to give you a little profile on that family, Thomas was roughly in his early 40s when he died, the father of 10. He had fought in the First World War also, and fought and took part in one of the bloodiest battles of that war, which was the landings at Suvla Bay. He survived it and came home with distinction to look after his wife and 10 kids, to die here. Subsequently, virtually all of those children emigrated as they grew up. Some live they've been here on a regular basis looking for their roots. Some live in New Zealand, others in Australia, and as Mary said there, we have been fortunate to have regular contact with the great-great-grandson, who was Kenneth Olson. He lives in New York, or just outside New York, because of reasons. He just couldn't make it, but he will come again. Because he was here a few years ago with his mother, and with the help of Willie Healy, they found the grave. His mother died last year, and part of her dying wish was that part of her ashes be spread here in Milltown. So we look forward to seeing Ken at a later stage when he comes over. And finally, I'll talk about my grandfather. We lived just here. He married Bridgie Blake. Anyway, Patrick, my grandfather, lived just across the road from the chapel. In the 1911 census, he had Anthony, his father, and Mary, his mother. Mary lived for 101 years, and I do remember her. I remember her balancing herself around the old house with the help of a Sugan chair as she walked around to take her exercises. She died around 1951 as well, same time as her daughter-in-law. In the 1911 census, Pat was the youngest of 7 children. By the time that terrible tragedy happened here, the 6 children all had gone. They had emigrated mainly to Philadelphia. So I remember my grandmother with great affection. I was 8 when she died. She was a lady of gentleness and kindness. She was a very good concertina player, a singer, and I still remember fondly her reminding me of one of the great songs, The Spinning Wheel, at the time sung by the great Delia Murphy. So they're the families of the people that died. But as I said, 10 or 11 people also got injured. Morris Reedy read for us tonight at Mass. His grandfather, Tom, carried a wound from a shot across his forehead here that an inch or two lower would have been fatal. He was only 14 when he was here at the presentation. During the time when they were picking up the bodies, Pat Maguire from the Forge here, who always had time to talk to me when I was growing up, was there helping carry John O'Loughlin, and he himself had been wounded seriously through the thigh, gunshot again. So a lot of damage was done. But the most profound damage was what happened next. What happened next was that crowds of people that began to hear about this atrocity began to assemble to help and to give comfort and give support to the townspeople who were struggling with this awfulness of this happening. The following day, the town just filled up with people, and the organisers of the Irish Republican Army and the other groups that were in action here decided that burial of the 3 men would happen fairly quickly. They contacted, and with the permission of the families, it was decided to bury the 3 men in what is now known as the Republican plot. So 2 days later, the funeral was organised. The men were put in their coffins, and they were carried through the town with a massive procession that filled all around the place. They marched as far as the barracks, and at that stage the RIC and the soldiers had stayed away in case there'd be retaliation. But they stopped outside, the cortege stopped outside, and the soldiers that were on duty duly bowed their head, moved down their gun in tribute to what had happened. So they proceeded to the grave, and the gentlemen were buried. Subsequently to that, some efforts were made to have an investigation, a coroner's investigation into it. And such was the pressure brought to bear by the international communities, by the strong Irish parties that were now active, that questions were asked in the House of Commons as to why this shouldn't go ahead. So it was decided to have a full inquest 2 weeks later in Ennis. At that inquest, such was the truthfulness and honesty of the testimonies by up to 24 or 25 local people who were there. So consistent was it, by comparison with the shocking efforts by the Crown forces to sully the whole incident, to try and place blame. Hampson tried to blame someone in the RIC, someone that shouldn't have pulled the trigger, someone that panicked. the Scottish soldiers in turn tried to pass blame to the irregulars, as they would have called them. And such was the power of those testimonies that the verdict passed by the county coroner was that this was willful murder caused by an unprovoked act. And he further recommended that the men, and he named mostly the front rank of the soldiers that were over there, and Sergeant Hampson and a few of the Scottish soldiers, he further decided they should go for a further trial. But these were the times, and times were changing. They were the times of the arrival of the Black and Tans into Ireland, and one of the first jobs that Sergeant Hampson got was his removal to up somewhere towards somewhere up the Midlands to train guerrilla forces to train Black and Tan forces on guerrilla warfare. So nothing happened. Nothing happened. The town was left to mourn this awful tragedy because circumstances began to move. We marched towards our freedom. But we are a town of great resilience down through the years. And that resilience I know because I was told by my family. That resilience carried those families through that awful, tragic thing that happened. And that's the strength of a powerful community of a small town like Milltown. I am forever grateful to them. John.
I simply want to say a few words of thanks. I'd like to thank Joe and Stephen for unveiling the plaque. I want to thank Gerard Talty and Francis Lynch for erecting the plaque in the first place, and also for erecting one at Hillary's, where a celebration of Dr. Michael Hillary's life and contribution to this area will take place on the 30th of this month, which is a Sunday at 1:15. I want to thank John Kelly, photographer, Michael O'Sullivan, video, and just to mention that all of today's events will be available on the Mid-Clare Brigade Facebook and on our website at midclarebrigade.ie. If there was any question or any doubt, the one person who was our go-to person is Cyril Jones. He is a local man, a wonderful historian, so I want to say mille buíochas to you, Cyril. Just before the battery went there, I was thanking the Gardaí and the GAA for their support. Mille buíochas to Shane Torpey. Thank you, Shane, for all of your support. We've all been waiting for 3 years. Thank you. The plaque is up, and I know you're particularly happy about that. Well done, Mary. It's given it to you.